Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luis Fraga, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Institute for Latino Studies, and on behalf of everyone at the Institute for Latino Studies and the University of Notre Dame, welcome. We are very fortunate, we say here at Notre Dame blessed, to have a magnificent speaker be with us today. Marisa Limon Garza is a native fronteriza with over 18 years of experience engaging multicultural communities through the lens of advocacy, education, strategic communications, and community involvement. She currently serves as Deputy Director of the Hope Border Institute, a social justice nonprofit organization working in El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juárez, Mexico, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hope, you may know, was recently awarded the 2020 Acthus Award by the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States for institutional contributions to theology in keeping with the mission of the Academy. Hope was also honored with the 2020 Capital Award for Public Service from Unidos US. Ms. Limon Garza previously led total market efforts at TKO Advertising, served as the Assistant Director of Community Engagement with the Austin Independent School District, where she led the Hispanic Scholarship Consortium. Marisa began her career as a classroom teacher at St. Austin Catholic School in Austin, Texas, and at St. Anthony Catholic School in Harlingen, Texas. She is a graduate of the Alliance for Catholic Education, an innovative program at the University of Notre Dame, committed to sustaining, strengthening, and transforming Catholic education. Ms. Limon Garza holds a master's in education and bachelor's in English and Spanish literature from the University of Notre Dame, and a certificate in nonprofit management from Georgetown University. Her education at Notre Dame is much more important than her education at Georgetown. She serves currently as the Student Recruitment Associate Director with the Hispanic Alumni of Notre Dame. The topic that she will address with us today is the El Paso Massacre 1 year later. Marisa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and greetings to everyone who is joining us today. Let's get started. Thank you for taking the time out today's conversation on the El Paso Massacre and what has been happening 1 year later. August 3rd, 2020 was the anniversary of the Matanza here locally. And so it's an important commemoration that we will make sure that we uphold, recall, and never, ever forget. So today's conversation is going to discuss a few different topics. Talk about my home, the borderlands. We'll set the stage. We'll then talk Matanza. We'll talk about Night Will Be No More, an important pastoral letter from Bishop Mark Seitz. We'll talk about life after, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So when we talk about my home, the borderlands, some from the media might tell you, you might think it's the Wild West of Texas, where there are mountains and it's a rugged environment, it's the desert, and all those things are true. And at the same time, it's a community made of many people that are vibrant and beautiful. This mural in downtown El Paso is a reminder of who we are and what we stand for, which is amor sin fronteras, that is love without borders. The community of El Paso is linked, as this mural also depicts. It's called Sister Cities by some amazing borderland artists called Los Dos. And it depicts the two sister cities of Juárez and El Paso, two communities that are connected by the same mountain range, separated by a river, the Rio Grande, but really one in spirit. Is that rugged mountains, those rugged environment I was talking about. This is the Franklin Mountains. We also in Las Cruces, New Mexico, have the Organ Mountains. And without El Paso, there would be no El Paso if there was no Ciudad Juárez. And so Ciudad Juárez, just again, to set the stage, is the home or adopted home for Juan Gabriel. And so here we have a tribute to him, a mural that was done just a few years back on his passing. We also have La X, the giant X that was uplifted and depicted here in Ciudad Juárez all showing a different kind of life and a different kind of rhythm. The people of El Paso are committed to welcoming one another, to being warm and friendly, and to be creating a home away from home for many immigrants that come from Mexico and other parts south of the border. It's important to recognize as we think about the El Paso massacre about what has been going on in context. The massacre took place in August 2019. Our organization, the Hope Border Institute, was 5 years ago in 2015, at the end of the Obama administration, at the beginning of the Trump administration, a very unique and pivotal moment in time. Our work centers on engaging with the public and helping Catholics really step into the public square by using the wonderful research that we conduct, by becoming strong advocates for policies that are more just, and for also developing leaders that can lead the cause and be part of the change that we want to see in a more just society. Unfortunately, while all those things I talked about at the beginning were true, that this is a community of families, of people working and playing and praying, we also know that El Paso and this part of the country, the whole entire southern border of the United States, has been totally, intentionally, again and again, marginalized and militarized, and in many ways, just taken the brunt of so much of a political agenda that comes out of Washington, D.C. In the years leading up to the massacre, we were seeing increasing numbers of people coming from not only Central America, as been reported, but from around the globe. If you visit detention centers for immigration here in El Paso, you will find people from the African continent, people from as far away as Russia, and all across Latin America. And so the migration that we see is not just from our neighbors from the South, but it's from the globe, or it's a global phenomenon. Those immigrant detention centers became criminalized through the zero tolerance policy. Zero tolerance, we had Jeff Sessions who put this into play, which really was saying that we will not accept any kind of really legal immigration. There would be a very narrow definition for what that meant. And we criminalized what it was to be an immigrant in many ways. If you didn't cross at a port of entry, then you were considered illegal and you had done something with real consequences that would land you not only in immigrant detention, but would also have legal charges brought against you. Zero tolerance led to, or was another byproduct of, related to family separation. It's important to note within the context of this system that family separation is something that's been going on for quite some time. What we saw in 2019 and 2018 of the ripping of children away from their parents was very unique in that it was very explicit and done with a certain sense of cruelty as the point. Deterrence is always the goal. Deterrence has always been the point, but the level of cruelty has created an environment where the idea was fear, and to make people just really not want to come to the southern border, even as they're leaving their countries of origin because of dire circumstances. It's important to note, especially for people who identify as Latino, Latina, Latinx, that the idea of familia in our culture, or in these cultures in many ways, is broad and it's encompassing. We have a very large worldview of what familia is. According to the United States government and the policy we have, family is very limited in a legal sense to a biological parent and a biological child. We know that two siblings have an incredible bond. We know that sometimes a grandparent and a grandchild, a neighbor, a vecino, all these people play a very important part in our life. And so through the guise of security and safety, we have disrupted these families and we've disrupted and taken people away. So it's both old, it's new, and it's ongoing. We know that immigrant detention, again, is an administrative function. We also have family detention. And these detention centers are very much part of our prison industrial complex in this country. They are money makers for private corporations. And they are also how many of the funds that are given to ICE are used in the spirit of detention. We also know that border wall construction is one of the first things that this administration and this president wanted to undertake, We've seen that happen with public taxpayer dollars, and we've also seen it with private dollars where people have built their own wall. And here in El Paso, we have seen that private wall. And so we have that construction here. We also are a home of militarization. We have people that work for Customs and Border Protection, ICE and Border Patrol. So we are a heavily militarized area. We also have seen the racist rhetoric, the dog whistles to white supremacy, the language from the very beginning of this administration that called our Mexican brothers and sisters rapists and murderers, which is a series of language and rhetoric that has really painted immigrants, people of color, anyone that is the other, as someone violent, as a threat, as not American, which we all know to be not true. And after all of these programs, if it wasn't enough, we then had the advent of the Remain in Mexico program, a policy designed to seal the border, to make any immigrants initially from Central America and then expanded out to more countries be refused admission. So instead of having someone come into the United States to seek asylum, their legal right, instead we forced people to stay in Mexico for any number of months and years at this point to wait proceedings in the United States without any guaranteed housing, without any guaranteed food, without any childcare or employment. And so all of this sets the stage and provides the context for what we actually saw on August 3rd, 2019. If you'd like additional immigration policy resources, I encourage you to visit hopeborder.org. Our Border Observatory is the research arm of our organization and includes a wealth of information from situation updates to various reports. So during this time, also providing context, what do we do? And I thought about changing this title to What Did We Do in the Past, but the reality, these things very much continue, just in different forms. So in a response to this injustice, we march. Here in our community of El Paso and Juarez, we've held very tightly to our role and to our work as people who are advocating for change, who are stepping up and stepping out. The children that you'll see in this picture actually came from an interfaith group out of Dallas. They rode a bus overnight. Dallas, even though we're in Texas, is in the same state, is very far away, almost 10 to 12 hours by bus. And they came overnight to spend the day for an encounter. These were people of coming together, and these are two Black children who asked how they could spell something in Spanish so they could be part of a march that we were happening late that day. So this shows the commitment that we have as part of our human family of people who come together and stand up and speak out. We also pray. This is a wall or a piece of it. You'll see the steel bollard fences. The foreground is El Paso, Texas. The background is the part of Ciudad Juarez known as Anapra. And this was a faith service that was held at the wall bi-nationally between both groups. This was obviously before the pandemic, when we were gathering together, using every tool in our toolbox to call out for justice, whether through prayer or whether through marching. We also know that we create one of the shelters in Ciudad Juarez that has been helping migrants for decades, the Casa del Migrante, the House of the Migrant. And they're part of a network of shelters all across Mexico who offer support and services. An artist that came from the Northeast part of the United States came to the borderland and wanted to share the story and share her art, which is muralism, with groups of people. And so we were able to connect her to the people that were staying at La Casa del Migrante. And together they co-created this mural. And so this depicts what they saw important. Definitely you see Our Lady of Guadalupe, we see Jesus Christ, we see children and families, and we see people together. And so we create even when we have these dark moments. We also help. This is the outside of one of the shelters in Ciudad Juarez that was lifted up by the Methodist Church in order to provide shelter for those that have been kept in Mexico as part of the Remain in Mexico program or the migrant protection protocols. A network of shelters, about 16 strong, have been supporting families, single adults, children since the ban. And initially there was one shelter, La Casa del Migrante, and now we have 16, all to respond to the needs of people seeking asylum in the United States, but forced to remain in Mexico. We also take action by remembering. We remember, these are the faces of 6 children that died in Border Patrol custody or shortly thereafter being in Border Patrol custody. We also honor their families, the spirit of their commitment to try to create a new life in a different country. And unfortunately, they were lost. And so they remain with us in our memory, and we champion them and we do our work in their name. We also bear witness. El Paso is not very far from Tornillo, which before Homestead was another location where children that came unaccompanied. Again, if we think about familia and family, we know that family is not just limited to a biological parent and child, but children who were considered unaccompanied were sometimes housed at Tornillo, a children's facility. Some might say a camp, some might say a detention center. And so through witnessing and art projects and different things that were created, there is now an exhibit. And so we bear witness to the art that the children created while they were during their stay in Tornillo. This is a replica of the barracks where they were housed. This is an example of one of the pieces of art that a young person drew while in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And it's an example of the realities that the consequences and the real implications that our immigration policy plays out when it comes to people. And we innovate. This is called, this was an interactive showcase between Ciudad Juárez and El Paso that had to do with radio dials and hearing one another on both sides of the border. So all of these examples are the things that we do. And ultimately we intersect, as you'll see here in this picture. These are 9 pallets of donations were brought together by the Rainbow Push Coalition, as you can see in the picture. This is a group of Black advocates, a coalition of faith leaders from Chicago who rented a truck, who actually didn't rent. They were donated a truck, and all these supplies, all 9 pallets, came from different churches at collections at the back of the church for people in the border. And so they had drivers, and the drivers came to the borderland and dropped off these 9 pallets, and then we worked on getting all the items across the border. And so not of ours alone, the work for justice is intersectional, and it takes many of us to commit and to see our humanity reflected back to us in one another. We also intercede. This is a picture of Bishop Mark Seitz from the Diocese of El Paso, who's gone to Juárez and is very connected to Juárez. He accompanied on several occasions families who were seeking asylum to the port of entry and interceded on their behalf and helped elevate their claims, and ultimately in most cases has had success in getting Customs and Border Protection to at least grant them an interview and to do some help in order for them to be able to proceed in the United States. This is a picture of him doing that work. So we step out as people of faith and we intercede. Unfortunately, all of that leads us up to August 3rd, 2019, where we do have a matanza. We do have a massacre. And this massacre was specifically of Mexican people who were going to be taking over the country. On a Saturday morning, just like any other day, people were on their way to do their mandado, get their groceries from the week. People came from Juárez and different parts of Chihuahua because this particular Walmart where the massacre took place is very close to a bus station. And some of the promotion is that you take the bus across from Juárez to El Paso, then you get another bus and you go to the bus station, you do your mandado at Walmart, you go back and you return. And it's very much part of, we are a very connected community. And so on a Saturday morning, just like any other, we had soccer teams raising money outside of the Walmart, people buying their back to school supplies, and then gunfire rang out. And 24 people ultimately lost their lives, and countless others were traumatized and or violently injured and are still to this day recovering. It was a day unlike any other. Hear about mass violence and gun shootings in other parts of the country, and as it has become more of a regular occurrence, you think that it will be your community, and you never think, or hope you never think, that your own community would be targeted because of your ethnicity, because of your national identity, because of where you're situated along the US-Mexico border. And so it's very painful and incredibly difficult to wrap one's brain, heart, head around all of that. And then to know in some ways that the president and this administration has done quite a bit to amplify this rhetoric. And so we will always remember these 24 people. And I'll just point out that Coach Memo, the last person on the list, was actually fighting for his life for 9 months in the hospital and before he unfortunately passed. And so this is a tragedy that is kind of seared onto the hearts of El Pasoans. Like many traumas, many people have not been able to return to Walmart, to that Walmart in particular, to many other Walmarts. The families are still figuring out how they will move forward and piece together their lives. There was just a 1-year anniversary event to try to bring some kind of solace, but there's much more grieving that needs to be done. So we didn't just sit back and watch and kind of take it in, but really there's been a vivid response. And so our efforts have been to demonstrate our love for community, our love for one another, and our choice to not fall victim to racism and white supremacy and not to uplift those messages. The Hope Border Institute was part of a vigil that took place the very next day on August 4th at a park in El Paso, very near that Walmart. And it was an amazing interfaith gathering and celebration of life in the midst of so much death. We also have engaged many communities from across the country, extended some love and kindness. This is a gathering of people from the AFL-CIO. The labor unions came for a visit to the borderlands, and this was at the actual original El Paso Memorial. And it was an amazing show of solidarity, as they literally spelled out. And it showed us just how much could be accomplished and how much healing and interconnectedness we all demonstrate when we go through some kind of hardship like this. And then ultimately, for us, the Hope Border Institute and for the diocese and the bishop in particular, we very much searched for the meaning and the lesson in this matanza. And for us, it became very clear that the racism and the white supremacy was something that we absolutely could not avoid looking at. While some wanted to paint a picture of gun violence and mental health as the causes and predictors of this kind of massacre, for us, it was very clear that this was a racist attack and that it was rooted in white supremacy, and that the people of El Paso represented for this man all of the things which he had decided were wrong with this country. And so in 2019, Bishop Seitz penned the pastoral letter to the people of God in El Paso titled "Night Will Be No More." And this pastoral letter accounts for the history and is an assessment on the history of our region, the history of our community, the way that racism and white supremacy has popped up from the very beginning and how it's so rooted here, and really the steps that we need to take as both a church and as a community and a people at large to really erase this and eradicate it and truly to become anti-racist. So for us, the lesson, the reminder is, yes, love over hate always, and always, always be anti-racist. Since that massacre, I would love to say that we've had the time and space to grieve, but all the things that I mentioned at the beginning in terms of immigration policy in particular are still going on. They're still in full force. And now, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic that is affecting people around the globe. We've just reached the grim milestone of 500 people that have died. We know that this pandemic over-indexes with Black and Latinx communities in El Paso. with its over 80% Latino community, is definitely ripe for that. In addition, we have some new challenges. Remain in Mexico is over 1 year old. We now have 17 shelters that are working in Juarez, and we have now the Border Refugee Assistance Fund, which is a unique partnership with the Bishop of El Paso. He had opened his pastoral center home to welcome migrants when we were seeing large migration flows. And once the Remain in Mexico program began, that all ended. And so he has now stayed the course with migrants and is still visiting them in Juarez. And he's been able to raise a large sum of money to make investments for humanitarian aid for those that are in the most need. We now know that COVID-19 has had an impact, and those same migrants and asylum seekers that are stuck in Ciudad Juarez, it's had an incredible economic impact on them. Many of them had found employment in different sectors, and that has obviously taken a great hit for everyone. We also know that these are some of the most vulnerable communities. And so just as we think in the United States of the poor and the most vulnerable, migrants and asylum seekers most definitely are, especially in a community that is not their own, when they're easily prey for violence and for any other kind of abuse. One bright light is the hotel. This was an innovation where instead of just having new people or people feeling ill who are migrants, who are trying to migrant shelters, be all over the place in the community, it was then decided this would be a great quarantine hub. And so people who are first coming and have been returned to Mexico, they are staying there for approximately 14 days until they have the all clear to move into another shelter. And so it's a way to filter out, as the name says, people and help them stay safe and stay well. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the administration has taken advantage of part of our public code called Title 42. And this pandemic, we already know that over 36 policies and rule changes have been made in this short time, that basically we've now ended asylum as we know it. The legal right is virtually impossible. People that are coming to our southern border are being expelled. This is different from a deportation. An expulsion is where people are expelled back to where they came from. If you're an adult and you came in through Mexico, you are returned to Mexico. If you are an unaccompanied child from, let's say, Guatemala, you would not be returned to Mexico, even if you presented yourself at a port of entry that's connected to Ciudad Juarez. Instead, you're actually taken back to Mexico, to Guatemala, to be expelled there. And many times this has happened without notification of any kind of parent or caregiver or any other person. And so many times this is not, it's an abuse and it's a violation of many kinds of human rights. And many of you may have seen photos or images of people in hotels all across the southern border in the United States where some children were being held before ICE could get them on a plane to go back to their country of origin. We also know there's been a reckoning, a much needed racial justice reckoning on behalf of Black Lives Matter and all these kinds of movements. Here, the bishop and several priests from the Diocese of El Paso came together to stand in solidarity, to resoundingly say that Black Lives Matter, and to stand against the injustices that we're seeing every day play out on US soil. In many ways, the violence and the hatred that brought the shooter to the Walmart on August 3rd is the same kind of violence that is being taken out on Black people all across this country. So now, we would be remiss if we didn't invite you to take some kind of action on behalf of the people who lost their lives, on behalf of the survivors, on behalf of our own community that is still grieving, that is still seeking answers, and is still fighting back to make the world a little bit more just. And to do this, we invite you to step outside of your comfort zone, do something different. COVID has thrown us all into our worlds upside down and into a tumult of change and uncertainty. But we ask that you do that. You find a new way. Do the anti-racism work. We can't just talk about it and admire the problem. We must search the contents of our hearts, search our souls, and think very clearly about our own systematized way that we have been supporting racism, supporting white supremacy, and uplifting structures that are oppressive. We have to engage in active solidarity and accompaniment with those that are the most marginalized and vulnerable. In many ways, this is the immigrant community in the United States. We call on everyone to consider a multi-faith approach. While I am a Catholic, and this organization, the Hope Border Institute that I represent, is also a Catholic organization, our work has been enriched and made more meaningful by the partnerships we share with our friends and collaborators from a myriad of faiths, whether it's the Baha'i community, whether it is the Jewish community or other Christian religions. These groups have provided a deeper understanding of who we are and exhibited our interconnectedness. We also invite you not to stay silent. This is an opportunity, if there ever was one before, at this moment in time in our country, to call in our family, our friends, our clergy, and our parishioners to be part of this work of racial justice, to be part of this work of anti-racism, to not sit out on the sidelines or think, I'm not racist, so I just can opt out of all of this, but instead to invite them in and to do the work together. We always want to engage our elected officials. In many ways, they have the power at their disposal to make things change. And then obviously, we want everybody who has the right to do so to vote. There are many in our community who are permanent residents, who are people who without immigration status or mixed status households, where not everyone gets that privilege and that benefit. We know that it's also under assault, and voter suppression, especially in a state like Texas, is very real. And so we encourage people to make a plan, to prepare, and to vote safely in early voting or even from home if that's possible. I want to ultimately share my contact information and the contact information for our organization, the Hope Border Institute. It's been wonderful speaking with you all today, and I look forward to our questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. We really appreciate your time and participation today. As Professor Fraga mentioned, this is the 5th event out of 11 in a series that the Institute for Latino Studies is offering the Notre Dame community, the community surrounding us here in Indiana, as well as nationally. We have several guests in our audience today from all over the country representing alumni, friends, and current students and faculty. So I'm going to start with some pre-submitted questions for you today. And I want to remind everybody in the audience that they can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and those will come directly to me, and we will check off what hasn't been talked about earlier in the presentation. To let all of you know, this is streaming live on Facebook, and you can visit our website by the end of the week to share the YouTube link with your friends and family. One of our questions from a student is, what can university students do to change or impact gun laws so that this doesn't happen again?
Excellent question. So yes, the gun laws are incredibly important, as we see in an open carry state like Texas and places across the country. That of tools that were used for this kind of mass violence are very difficult. I would take a cue out of the group from Parkland, the March for Our Lives, and become engaged with their efforts. If you are not from Indiana originally, if you have another home state, I would get to know what is happening in your home state in terms of who are your US representatives, who are your senators in Congress, and what is their stance, on gun violence? Are they not gun violence in particular, but on guns and assault rifles and these kinds of bump stocks and all kinds of different things that are part of this conversation? It's incredibly important to know where our elected officials stand, and if we are not on board with where they stand, to have that conversation, to call them, to engage with their staff, to email them, to engage with since they need to engage with their constituency. It's incredibly important. So those would be my recommendations on ways to make sure that the access to these kinds of high-powered weapons is under much more control.
Thank you so much. One of our faculty members asked, how have local organizations continued to come together after this terrible tragedy? We know you shared a lot of the intersections in your slide, but can you give us some anecdotal information of what you're seeing today, 1 year later?
Absolutely. So to be perfectly honest, the community is still very much figuring that out. So right away, there was a response of shock and not really understanding how to put the pieces together. My husband and I tried to get dinner that night, and Paso is it's a big city, but things kind of end earlier. And so we were out like at 9 o'clock and it was a ghost town. There was no one on the street, very much like the times of the pandemic now, but it was shocking that so many people had literally hungered down. The fear is still very real. We partner with a tremendous group of coalitions, a variety of coalitions. There's the Borderland Immigration Council, the Coalition for the Common Good. And then we have some great partnerships with the Interfaith Alliance of the Southwest, and then also a new anti-racism commission that the bishop has convened. And so all of these groups have come together in different ways to really reflect. The 1 year anniversary was certainly a time to continue to put forward what it means to process a trauma like this. Unfortunately, there wasn't much time to catch our breaths and to truly grieve before we kind of jumped onto the El Paso Strong bandwagon in some ways, which was helpful to some people, but for others, it skipped some steps. And so we now still have an ongoing opportunity to do that kind of grieving. And of course, now we're also grieving COVID-19 and all these other losses, yet we retain that hope. And so we do work together in coalition and collaboration with the county and with the city as well to make sure that the needs of impacted communities are continually uplifted and hopefully come to some kind of peaceful outcome.
So in our description of this event, we mentioned that this was the largest attack on Latino Americans in modern history. How have you seen the behaviors or the identities of people, your neighbors, friends, people on the border? How do they feel about who they are and what their brownness represents in America?
So if you come to El Paso, I remember this, it's such a different place in that the Latino community, the Latinx community is the majority of El Paso. So this city is brown, this city is bilingual, this city is binational, bicultural, all of these things. It is very much alive. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's like a Wakanda, but kind of in some ways, that it is of us, by us, around us. There's many challenges, but there's also many things that are just beautiful. And so there's definitely this understanding and this feeling that's been articulated in a few different circles of we've just got a target on our backs. And I think that felt theoretical at the beginning of this administration, and then after August 3rd was literal. And so that's had a profound impact on people. I know that within the Hope Border Institute, we think about this a lot in terms of our national dialogues that we have with partners across the country. We think about it in terms of the presidential elections and the ways that we're represented or not. It means watching the Democratic National Convention, for example, and not seeing the participation of our own Latino candidate. That was frustrating to know that we now have presidential debates coming up and there won't be Latino journalists engaging with them. And that is something that is not lost on people here. People very much identify with that. People understand, and people are not wanting to maintain that as the status quo. So there is a hunger for change, and there is a desire to not be the targeted community, but instead to be the community that is independent, thoughtful, creative, and innovative in ways that, in a deep wisdom that really is only made available at the intersection of so many cultures.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question from an alumnus. have you seen any overarching changes in the El Paso community since the massacre? So this can include policy or practices or changes in the daily life of El Pasoans.
Sure. So two things immediately came to mind. One being, and in the year since, there are many, many, many outward displays of resistance, of strength. And so you'll see the El Paso Strong banner everywhere. It's almost like become a billboard for our community. It's on businesses, it's on family, it's in neighborhoods. Like there'll just be signs that say El Paso Strong, El Paso Strong. And so it's definitely part of the consciousness and part of an articulation of beliefs and of values. And the other thing, which is I think incredibly unfortunate in my perspective, but others may feel better because of it, but you cannot go to a store. And for a long time after the massacre, less now because of the pandemic, but there was no store that you would go to that did not have a security guard outside. Whether that was a Walmart, whether that's a TJ Maxx, an Albertsons, there's always a security guard out front that has a gun in their holster. And we've already been a militarized community, but that's a new level of just having a visible presence of safety and security in a very policed way that is designed to provide comfort and safety, but at the same time is a reminder of what's happened. So those are the two things that stick out to me.
So for those folks who don't live on the border, who don't see what you see every day in El Paso, how can we honor those families? How can we honor those folks who were killed on August 3rd?
So there's many ways, just like we would recognize and uplift, hopefully, the families of people that were killed in synagogues or in the Baptist churches in different places around the country, the children at the high school, the children at Stony Brook. There's so much loss. And in many ways, the ways that we can uplift and elevate and connect with them is really by looking at the ways that hatred and the ways that our culture have taken a toll on our soul. In many ways, we have created, and I say we as the American public, have created a culture where this kind of outpouring of violence is the norm. And so to honor and uplift is to understand those places in our own hearts. It's important to think about how we can also do the anti-racism work, which I keep returning back to because it's so important. I know many people after the murder of George Floyd were asking all over the internet and in WhatsApp groups and text groups and all kinds of things like, what can we do? What can we do? And a lot of people started with reading, which is incredibly important, whether it was Audre Lorde or Ibram Kendi, whichever kind of great thinker, James Baldwin. And that is incredibly important. And now, if people have been doing that study, it becomes a question of, okay, so how do you apply this? How does this change? And so I would honestly say for anybody who to uplift and be the testament to the lives of these people that we've lost, these 24 people, plus all the lives that were shattered, is to think about your spheres of influence. Where do you have power? Is it in your family? Is it in your neighborhood, in your church? Is it in the boardroom of your corporation? Is it in the school where you teach, where you lead? What is the sphere of influence that you have? How are you using that to create a more equitable world? Because ultimately, they were killed because of their difference, because they became a scapegoat for racist ideologies. And those are not natural, inherent things that we're born with. Those are learned behaviors. And institutions, our schools, our universities, our corporations, pretty much everything has this in their DNA, this white supremacy, this racism. And so we have to think, and we have to choose to be the ones to do that critical work. And we have to be the ones that choose to stay the course when it's no longer what everyone's posting about on Instagram, whether it's no longer what's captured in a tweet. But staying the course for the long haul means doing the work of racial justice in a way that is going to create a better world so that a massacre like this would never happen again.
Thank you very much. This was a very heartfelt and informational talk, Marisa, and also very special for us given that you are a Notre Dame alumnus. And so we want to extend our appreciation on behalf of the Institute for Latino Studies for spending time with us today. And I would like to hand off the closing remarks to our director, Luis Fraga. We may be having some technical difficulties. I apologize for that pause. There you are.
There I am. I just want to say thank you so much, Marisa, for sharing with us what is clearly a perspective and an understanding filled with insight, ironically enough, perhaps filled with love, and certainly filled with hope for a much better future for El Paso, for the country as a whole, and especially for racial and social justice. I am proud to say that Marisa is not just a friend of the Institute for Latino Studies, but is also a friend of mine and someone who I know will continue to be a dear friend for many years to come. Marisa, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sharing your insights with us. I also want to let folks know that we have more events coming up as part of our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. On Wednesday, this Wednesday, September 30th, we have a networking event for our Latino Studies majors and minors. On Monday, October 5th, we have a presentation by one of our faculty fellows, Associate Professor and Chair of American Studies, Jason Ruiz, who will talk about the Latino murals of Pilsen and how he has used them to teach, better understand, and do research on issues associated with Latino communities in Chicago. And then on Wednesday, October 7th, we have another one of our faculty fellows, Assistant Professor of Art History, Tatiana Reynosa, who will examine Dreamers on the Borderline, the art of Sandra Fernandez. What we're doing, as you no doubt can see in all of these presentations, is to try to broaden and deepen our understanding of Latino communities in the United States today, and to broaden and deepen our understanding in the process of our country and what challenges our country still faces in supporting Latino communities to become full and participating members of our society. Thank you everyone for joining us. I appreciate it very much. And from everyone at ILS, have a good evening.